Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am Briar Harvey. Hopefully, less pandemonium this time. This is the Neurodiversity Media Network, and we are here today for some personal evolution, which clearly I need some. So, today I'm joined by the lovely and delightful Biba Atta. This season is all about imposter syndrome, and we are going to be talking about how it shows up, who it shows up for, and what most people have wrong about it. Today, we're leaning into who. So, let's talk about who is most likely to, I don't want to say suffer from, because that's really not the right choice of words here,
Mhm,
as we're trying to get across in this series.
mhm.
Who is most likely to feel imposter syndrome?
That's a great question and a great point too, Briar. We all are. Everyone. We're all. No one is immune, if you will. So it can be experienced by people in the C-suite, students, new mothers, stay-at-home moms. It could be experienced by artists and speakers and managers and entrepreneurs and teachers and just anyone. It doesn't matter what age you are, your race, your gender, your socioeconomic status, none of your income levels, none of the above. Like anyone can get it how they live it with imposter syndrome, basically. No one's immune.
If no one's immune, then why is it such a big deal?
It is such a big deal because it's so very uncomfortable. It is, for a lot of people, it feels like this heavy burden that they're carrying. If you think about just the idea of, and I think we'll probably get into this in upcoming sessions, but if you think about the idea of like there's this element of shame to it, and shame in and of itself is just such a heavy, very taxing, very toxic emotion, unfortunately, that is very inescapable. So you feel like you're doing stuff by yourself, you feel like you're hiding, and you're trying to keep your head above water, you're trying not to drown. And so for those that are experiencing it, it's a big deal because it affects everything in in a way that just it feels horrible.
And I think the issue is that it feels horrible, so nobody talks about it and normalizes that experience,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And that's part of why when we were talking last time about finding mentors and being able to find your own safe communities or your safe spaces where you can be honest and vulnerable about how you're feeling and what is going on. So it just doesn't, it's not just residing with you. And you can ultimately learn that you're not by yourself. And even some of your heroes and people that you admire or people that you think don't experience that, they do. And so in having those conversations, it really does open up that it's a normal occurrence.
It's a normal occurrence that we all experience. So when does it happen?
It typically happens when you're trying something new, or there's something out of the norm that you're used to doing, or some sort of high pressure situation where success is vital. So you can experience it if you've gotten a new job or you're interviewing for a new job. There have been people who graduate from college and are starting to experience imposter syndrome because they may feel like everything that they've gone through in college did not prepare them for the real world. And so they're questioning, are they going to be able to cut it? If you're coming back from maternity leave or a leave of absence from work, or you've been promoted to a position above your peers, some of whom have been in the organization or in that role longer than you have, a C-suite executive position that a Latina just recently filled, where she is the only person of color in the room. So there could be a number of, all kinds of scenarios where you can feel imposter syndrome. You're showing your artwork for the first time in a brand new gallery, and then some big wig comes, and you're just like, oh my God, are they going to like my stuff so they can buy my things? Or, why are they not at this other popular artist's place and they're here looking at my stuff? So it can happen at any time. It can happen for various and sundry reasons, whether it is work related or something that has to do with your passion or your creativity or your art, and also your personal life. So it comes at any time.
It comes at any time, and yet the ways in which it manifests for people is distinctly different, right?
Yes. Hmm.
Let's talk about how this can show up for folks.
Sure. It can show up in one way or a combination of the ways. It can be that you're a workaholic. You're doing a lot of work, trying to get a lot of things done so that people don't notice that, you're falling behind or that you don't know what you're doing. It could be that you are having a hard time accepting praise for your work. So you may push it off on, oh, the team did this, or so and so in the office is the real hero here, not me. Or you attribute any kind of success or good work that you're doing to luck, being at the right place at the right time, having the right connections. It's never due to your effort, but something outside of you that has nothing to do with you or that's not really in your control. It can show up as giving away authority in the team. So maybe you're tasked with being the head person or the leader of the team, where you're mobilizing the troops, so to speak, and you push that responsibility off on someone else because you don't believe that you have what it takes enough to do the work. If you are comparing yourself and to other people and thinking that you don't do the same thing that they do or they're better than you and all the things, and so that can create some unrealistic expectations for you, because they may have been there for 50 years. So no, you don't do it like John does it, but you're looking at John, who's been there for 50 years. You just got there last week, and you're thinking that you need to be performing like John does. And so that again creates this unrealistic expectation for yourself, and you may work yourself to the bone, as a result. It could be looking like you're just hiding. You're hiding from any level of that's going to put you like out in front of anyone important. There could be a fear of success that you have, because a fear of success, or success means that you're going to have to keep up the appearances. So if you killed yourself to get the success, then it's like the bar has now been raised. And so you're going to have to keep up that level of work in order to continue to be successful. The fear of failure. If you are failing, then it's like you're telling everyone exactly that you don't belong, or that you don't know what you're doing, or that you really are a fraud. And so there's a lot of things that you're willing to do in order to avoid that, like at all costs. And that could look like taking work on home on the weekends. And again, heading into that workaholism. Perfectionism is another one that a lot of people experience. Like, God forbid you spell a word wrong in an email, like you just rake yourself over the coals, when it's just like, oh, okay, people make mistakes all the time. It's not, they knew what you meant. It's not like it's that bad, but just the way that you treat yourself for mistakes and things that you make. But a lot of times those mistakes mean that you are not the person for the role, or that you are an imposter. You don't know what you're talking about. The self-doubts that come in to your work in general, and hiding yourself, and all these other kinds of things in order for other people not to see it. But that's an energy, and it still comes up in the way that you make decisions, the questions that you ask, the way that you show up in a room, where you sit in a room, the roles that you take up, the things that you go after. So all of these things are indicators of imposter syndrome.
And
And
so many of those things are also learned, lived experiences,
mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? And I think this is what I want to really focus in on today,
Mm-hmm.
because we touched on how this affects marginalized communities in the first episode, but
Mm-hmm.
this really is where the meat of this is for you.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you say spelled something wrong in an email and it's
Mm-hmm.
not a big deal, and I'm like, oh yeah, except for that one time I nearly got fired because John got mad about it, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
there are so many places where what we call imposter syndrome is trauma. So let's unpack that.
Yeah. 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 You're absolutely right. A lot of where it comes from has to do, like you said, learned lived behavior, things that have been drilled into us, ways in which we've been indoctrinated, the cultures that we exist in, societal conditioning, and those kinds of things. And so when we are experiencing traumatic experience, whether they're big T traumas like, your house burnt down, or physical violence, or those kinds of things, or little T dramas where at a particular point in your life you've made something mean more than what it would mean in your later adulthood, simply because you didn't have the language, or you didn't have the full picture or the understanding because of how young you were, and the inexperience that you had as well. So if you look at it as an adult, you're like, oh, that wasn't that big of a deal, but as a 3-year-old, that was like destroyed your whole world. So like if your mom came in and yelled at you, like my mom yells at me from time to time now. It doesn't happen often because she's just not, that kind of mom. But when she does, I'm just like, okay, doesn't mean anything. But as a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, like it's jarring, especially if that's not something that I'm used to. So I made that mean something. There was a belief that I created, and there are now behaviors and patterns that I'm now existing in so that I can avoid that happening again based on that belief. And so it continues to show up over and over and over again. And you build your entire life based on this program that has been created, that happened at a time when you didn't know any better. You didn't know enough to come to a different conclusion. And you made it about you when more than likely it wasn't about you. So yeah, it's based on the trauma. So we're all a bunch of walking nerves, bumping up against each other
Right.
in these workplaces, in these dynamics, in these relationships or friendships, in the grocery store, and any little thing can be the that you touch on could be the trigger for someone's lived trauma, someone's lived experience. And if you don't know them, then it's kind of hard to avoid. And so I mean, this is like we can go down a whole rabbit hole about, emotional intelligence and feelings and emotions and triggers and all those other kinds of things. But, bringing it back to your point earlier, the trigger in an environment that makes us feel like we are imposters or someone's going to find out is usually based around some things that we learned earlier in life, some experiences that we had. And so being in that environment triggers certain behaviors, which is, the workaholism, the fear of success, and all the other things that we talked about.
So it takes a deep level of emotional awareness to
Mm-hmm.
start unpacking the differences, right,
Mm-hmm.
between our traumas and what we perceive as imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
At a surface level, how can I go about believing that it's not about me?
Oh, at a surface level. It's a great question. At a surface level, how do you go about not believing it's not about you? Um, I really couldn't even tell you, except for it usually isn't. It's kind of hard to just, and that's the thing about the surface level stuff. It's like, you tell yourself certain things, but inherently you believe that it is. And so, even though it isn't, and even though you can ask the questions or you can repeat that to yourself over and over again until maybe one day you get it, it's going to be, sometimes it's hard for people to come by. Like, there was a part where I thought it was all about me. That was my fault. Someone's looking at me a particular way, they perceive me a certain way. And, even though I've done a lot of inner work, like I still have moments where it's like, oh, they're talking about me, or they're judging me, or oh, and then I respond based on that. But I've gotten better about how often I make things about me. So it's the work that you do in order to get to that point. Another thing that you could possibly do, like instead of trying to trick yourself, you might want to have a conversation. Like, I noticed that this is so on and so forth. This is what's going on, and how do you feel about that? How do you feel about the quality of my work? Do you have any feedback, or is there something that I've done, or is there some, just formulating a question that's in that moment that will help you to understand like what it's really about. Not usually when they're in the heat of the moment. So if they're having a whole flip out session and they're being completely unprofessional or unloving, that's not necessarily the time to ask, like, did I do something wrong? Or was it something I said? You have to like kind of distance yourself until, cooler heads prevail or whatever. And then you can have certain, a kind of conversation. But it's important to formulate the right question so it doesn't come off as like you're already treating it like it's your fault. Like, you're coming off as you're already apologizing through the way that you ask the question, or through your body language, or through the energy that you're putting out. Like, you're not apologizing, you're simply getting more information so that you have what you need, so that you can move forward. So you're not thinking this is about me, because it usually isn't.
It usually isn't. And because we are the Neurodiversity Media Network,
Mm-hmm.
we have to talk here, especially about the ways in which rejection sensitivity dysphoria shows up.
Mm-hmm.
Because I will often make things about me when they are not about me
Yeah.
at all. And because I've done that, it's much easier to go down the rabbit hole of me at fault,
Mm-hmm.
me as flawed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, what is so vital here, I think, is about that communication piece.
Mm-hmm.
Did you actually mean this the way that you said it? Is this actually about me?
Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of us, that's very difficult. So let's talk about how we structurally can make these things easier.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a great point. Um, Structurally making it easier, especially when you're in that place. Like, if you're already like, this my fault, I did something and I'm flawed, and so on and so forth. You may not be the person to come up with the question. You may not be the person to formulate or to figure out the best way to handle or deal with this situation. And that again is why having your own community of people, whether it's a mentor, whether it is a professor, or someone who is in corporate America who's gone through some things that understand you better, can help you through the situation. Like, you got to have your sounding boards, you got to have your advisory council, because sometimes you're not going to be able, because when you're feeling a certain way and you're already at a deficit and you're very on the defensive, then it's going to be really hard for you to come up with like the best possible way to address this. And so going to somebody else again that understands you, that knows about these kind of situations, and having that conversation is going to be, it's the best possible thing that you can do. You got to have your sounding board, you got to have your crew.
Yeah, because I spend so much time in my head. And that's
Mm,
part of what imposter syndrome is, right?
mhm. Yeah.
It makes you question your judgment.
Mhm. Yeah. Question your judgment, question who you are, question your abilities, question why you're there. You question all the things. And if you're in your head and you're questioning so much, then how are you really showing up? You're not showing up confidently. You're not showing up like they asked you to be here. You're not showing up like you have all of this experience, all of this knowledge, or you're, a world renowned, statistician. You're not showing up like that. You're showing up as if, they're doing you a favor by having you here. And that's not the case. And so it really does attack your confidence in your work, and again, while you're there, and it shows up in how you do the work and what you do in those situations, like how you make your decisions, how you talk to people, where you sit in the room, who you defer to, and how you go about doing the things.
And yet, did they really get me for my expertise or am I a diversity hire? Right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we tell the difference between our trauma and lived experience
Mm-hmm.
and the story that we're telling ourselves in our head?
Usually the story that we're telling ourselves in our head tend to be based on those experiences. So I don't know that they're necessarily separate. But what I will say is to pay attention to when they come. And when you start to observe, that's why that observation is so important. So before you do something, before you react, just take a breather, take a pause, take a breath, and then start asking yourself some questions like, "Ooh, like where did that hit me? Is that reminding me of something? Is this situation reminding me of something that I went through? What am I making this situation mean? What am I telling myself about the situation? Does the other person who was involved, does that person remind me of someone in my life that was maybe an authority figure or said something that is triggering like this response in me?" So you can start asking yourself a bunch of questions just so you're noticing, all right, when these things start to happen, or then when this word comes up, or when this person does something along the lines of this kind of behavior, then I'm more likely to be triggered, and it has to do with this. So you start by asking yourself about the trigger, like giving the information to fill in the blanks, like what is it? What do you feel? What's being triggered? And then once you get the information about like that present moment, then you can take that and start going back. When was the first time I experienced this? What does this remind me of? Is this the first time that I've had this experience? Oh, well, there was that time when I was in high school and I was in front of the class and I had that math project and everybody laughed at me and my teacher didn't stand up for me. Okay, so now we're starting to make some ties. Was there another time? And you keep going back. And so usually it's connected to something or some things, but your more recent experience isn't the first time. But start with the now and then use that to go back and see where it began.
And that's important. Something I've learned recently is that when we experience trauma, our neural pathways are embedded
Mhm.
with the chemical response that
Mhm.
we felt in our bodies at that time
Mhm.
to that trauma. So if I'm feeling triggered and it's because this event was a previous trauma, I'm going to
Mhm.
feel exactly the same way I did at that
Mhm.
time. And if I'm experiencing this feeling a lot,
Mhm.
that neural pathway just gets deeper and
Mhm.
deeper and deeper with more layers of those. It's a chemical kamikaze is what it is.
Ooh, ooh.
Like, it's really terrible the ways in which we do this to ourselves.
Mhm. Mhm. And I do want to point out too that, when we're experiencing it in real time, it feels terrible. And then when we start to go into it, it's like, I'm doing this. Like, I have the power to do something else, to make a different choice, to think a different thought, to feel something else. And also, if you think about what this is really about, it's a mechanism to protect yourself. And it's got a little twisted around because, again, like the mechanisms that you used at the time, or you created at the time to protect yourself, were based on things that you understood to the best of your ability at that time. And now that you're somewhere else, there's so much more information. There's so much more available to us. And so we can't say that, if that happened now, like we're going to think of it differently or feel it differently, or we're going to make it mean something else. Like, that's not the case. But, we do it to ourselves. And also the reason why is because we want to make sure that we're safe. We want to make sure that we're protected. We don't want to put ourselves in a situation where there is danger, and usually danger means unknown to us, and doesn't mean that it actually, on the other side of that project, that there's an alligator that's waiting for you on the other side of the door. It doesn't mean that. But in our, like, our mind, or our neural pathways, like you were talking about, like, those things are put there to make sure that we don't go beyond what's normal for us, or our comfort zone, so to speak. So we just want to protect ourselves from what could possibly be a very detrimental or dangerous or harmful experience, or one that's going to hurt us, to make us feel like we're being judged, or we're being rejected, or we don't belong, and all those other things. And so we want to avoid those at all costs. And we put these things in place, like you were talking about, the neural pathways that just, put the grooves there. I like to think of it like a record. So there are grooves in a record, and it
Mm.
plays it. When you play it, it's going to dip, and there are things in there to make it play certain sounds of the music the way that it does, until you put a scratch across it, which messes it up, so it's not going to play the same. But every time you play it, and records are old, so we're talking about, 50s, 60s, 70s, and you can play a record now that you bought in the 70s, it's going to play the same as long as you keep it clean. So that ought to tell you about just how, when things are embedded, when that groove is just really programmed in there, no matter how long it's been since you first created that record, it's going to continue to play the same, the same, the same, the same, until something interrupts it.
And we are clearly at the point where we are the pattern interrupts. We
Mm-hmm.
have to be that for ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and we're too close.
Yeah.
So, how can we identify those situations in which our first response is not always going to be our best response? How do we know when it's time to take it to the group chat?
uh I think, that's the thing about a trigger. Usually when you get triggered, there's no thought involved in where you go. And depending on the kind of person you are, and like what your mechanisms are when you're triggered, or the type of thing, or the thing that was triggered, it can trigger a certain response in you. You could be fighting, you could be, rolling out of the scene, you could freeze, there's the fawn, there's all those things. So usually when that starts to occur, like, if unless you're someone who's like already doing the observation, so you're already noting, like, okay, all right, we're getting a little closer, we're getting a little closer, so there's still a level of control that you have, and then you can exit stage left. So until you're doing that, it's great to look at some other times when it happened before. So start to look at your past. Start to look at a recent occurrence where you like flipped out, or you had to go in the bathroom and you cried for 30 minutes. You start to look at those situations, especially your more recent ones, because they're fresh. You can start to ask yourself questions about those things and say, I noticed when he said this, and a kind of situation, like he said this, and it reminded me of this situation that my dad said to me when I was younger, and it really pissed me off, and that's why I had to cuss his ass out in the boardroom, like, sort of situation. So you start to look at the newest things, and what your responses have been to those things, and then you break them down to the point where you're like, all right, when this person starts getting a little puffy, and then I feel the hair on the back of my neck rise. I know I am getting ready to be triggered. That is the first sign of me getting triggered, and I'm getting ready to fuck some stuff up. So let me just say, excuse me while I take a bathroom break or cigarette break. I need to walk around the block, or I'm feeling myself getting ready to check out, and I don't want to respond unprofessionally. So I think maybe what would be best is if we table this conversation and move on to the next item on the agenda, and we can come back to this at another time or something like that. So you start to become hyper aware of the little things, the sensations in the body. I'm starting to feel that fluttering in my stomach, the kind that feels like I need to go to the bathroom, but I know I don't because I just went, like little tiny things that remind you, like, okay, when I'm feeling this is what's getting ready to happen, because it's happened so many times before.
Right, if we go back to the record analogy,
Mm-hmm.
it's the old stuff is what makes the groove, but the
Mm-hmm.
stuff that you have the best access to is like the last time you played this record.
Yes.
So, in order to be able to get to the stuff in the lower layers, you got to be able to trace the stuff most recently.
Mhm. Mhm. That's right.
And the record scratch, the pattern interrupts.
Yes.
Those are things that we put in place so that we have the ability to not go down that same neural
Mhm.
pathway.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we're going to be talking about those specifically in another episode, I'm assuming.
Absolutely. Yes, we will.
And so I think what I want to bring us home to is the ways in which we can identify fault is not a good word. Responsibility is.
Mm.
What
Mhm.
is my responsibility for being aware of how these things are mine and how these things are systemic?
Ooh, that is you and these questions. I always tell you this, like, they're great questions. We kind of touched on this the last time, where when people are out here talking about imposter syndrome, the experts and the people who are doing the speeches and writing the books and all that stuff, the way it's couched is that it is your fault. It is your responsibility. Like, you are the one who has to do all of the things, when there are systems, there are containers, there are corporate environments that are like the devil, like they are really creating or have created this environment where everyone is expected to fall in line, and mistakes are not accepted, and people are not really they're not trained properly, and they're not accepting of the expectation is that you're going to work your fingers to the bone, and all these other kinds of things, whether they say it directly or it's indirect, or there are people who are in higher levels of positions that do believe that because of how they were brought up. So that may not even be the corporate stance, but because they're in a high position, this is how you're expected to work underneath of, say, Brian, type of situation. So while the condition or the environment is definitely not your fault, um, nor is it your responsibility. It's something to keep in mind, but the only thing that you can control is yourself. So things start and end with you. You start with getting to know you. You start with observing yourself, and you start with noticing when you're getting triggered, or putting a little pause or a breath or something in between, and start to interrupt your own patterns, learn more about yourself, and then you're able to see things in other people. You're able to understand other people a little bit better, who are going through triggers. So you may not be the person who's getting triggered, but you're watching Brian getting ready to lose it because he's triggered, and so you're able to see certain things. So you already are preparing yourself. You've got your internal earplugs. So you're not even going to allow yourself to take in what this person is saying, because you realize they've lost it. They're wherever they are. So it's not on you, even if you answer the question, and you know he's getting ready to have a conniption about it. The conniption isn't your fault. So as far as the responsibility is concerned, like, you are your responsibility. And when you're starting with yourself, it opens up the ability to have honest conversation, to be able to be vulnerable, to be able to share with other people. Because if you're able to see these things in other people, then there's a connection that's being made there already. Like, I feel that that happens to me too. And that right there, that one line opens up a conversation. And the trust is there, that vulnerability is there. And it's more, and even though it's not the entire company, or it's not the household, or it's not the system, that one piece, that you're still in a small container where it is the way that it should be, where people should be able to have a safe space to share. They should be able to talk about, what they're going through, and suggestions and mentorship and all the rest of the stuff comes in. And then it starts to open up, because now you're creating a bigger community. So it was the two of you having a conversation, then it's somebody else at the water cooler who's now joined the two of you, so now it's three. And then the other person heard what you were talking about, and they happen to be in a pretty high up position at the company, and they've been thinking about that on their own, and they've been having these side conversations with people that are in the C suite, and maybe they want to think about putting something in place that would be better, that would be helpful for the employees, or put out a survey to see how many people who are suffering from that now, and what kinds of things can the company do to make it better. Like, it starts with you, and then it opens up small, small, bigger, 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 until real change, bigger changes happen.
And if you are in a position of leadership, we invite you to attend Faith Clark's restorative session. I will drop the link in the show
Please
notes.
do.
We were
Oh,
just talking about that. She's got 6 sessions coming
mhm.
next year. They're going to be amazing.
Yeah,
But if
she's
you're
amazing.
not in a leadership position, if I'm just carrying around Brian's aggression, right? I have to know. I think here the question is, when does this stop being my responsibility and my obligation becomes to protect myself? If I know that the issues are systemic
Mhm.
and they are repeating, and I've done the work,
Right.
right? And it's not about me anymore.
Mhm.
How do I know when it's time to go?
I am of the opinion that the work never ends. I mean, it's not sexy. No one wants to hear that. Everybody wants a, when's the finish line? Where's that at?
There's no
It
finish
is,
line.
it's never ending. You're always learning, you're always evolving, you're always growing. That happens. But there are points when you get to a particular level where there are certain things that you used to experience that you realize are no longer, that's no longer your get down. It's no longer, the groove in the record doesn't exist. You were mixing it up at a club last week. You scratched the fuck out of the record isn't playing like it was playing before. And so when you arrive at that point, there's like an inner knowing that you have about things, and you trust that. And so I honestly believe, like, you'll know. There's nothing I can really tell you, like, look for this. I think that that's when you start to trust yourself, where you're able to go in and just, like, I know, like, I know my own name, that it's time to go. I know that this is not, I got what I needed to get. I know that I'm not going to be able to get anything more from being in here. The way that this is toxic. I can see it. And yeah, I had things that I was doing here before that, like, I needed to do. And I know that I've reached that. That's happened. And now it's time to move on. But it's really about you learning to trust yourself, follow your gut, listen to yourself more. That's part of why self observation and the awareness piece is so very important, because we have gotten so far away from ourselves that we're using things and people and tools and crutches outside of us to help us to make a determination, to, figure out the answer, even about ourselves. Like, what do you think is my strongest characteristic? What do you think is my strong? Like, you don't know me. You may know a version of me. You may know me to show up in a particular way. So, yeah, to you, because of our relationship is what it is, this may appear to be my strongest characteristic. But my real strongest characteristic is one you've never seen before because we don't have that kind of connection. So, it's because, and I know that because I know me. And so, and I trust me. So it's working on yourself enough to get to, I feel confident in myself. I feel confident. I understand my gut sensations. I trust that. I trust myself. And then going from there. But I firmly believe that when you get there, you will know.
Yeah, I think that's because the opposite of imposter syndrome isn't pride,
No.
it's awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And the the more that you recognize where you have value,
Mm-hmm.
the easier it becomes to name that for other people, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
So, where are we going from here?
Good question. Always good questions. Where we're going from here is to talk more about the solutions and other ways that they've got it wrong, just even in the way that it's talked about. When most people say that they want to overcome or eradicate or eliminate and imposter syndrome. And so it really starts with like how we word things and how we're really looking at it and what it's really there meant to do. And so it's a shifting of a perspective about what it is and what it's there to do for us, even though it doesn't feel like that, given that that may not, that feels horrible when it's like extremely exacerbated and you're feeling weighted by it. So where we're going is really like changing a perspective in how we talk about it. And that also means and what a solution truly looks like. And yeah, yeah.
So, I'm watching this. I'm definitely not there yet.
Mm-hmm.
Leave me with something that's gonna make me feel better about this record that I'm stuck in, right? This record has been playing over and over and over. And if I'm here, I know enough, I think, to say this is not just about me,
Mm-hmm.
but it still feels that way.
What I can leave you with is that you're at the start. I mean, the fact that you even recognize that it's not about you but it feels that way is a start. It's a beginning, and from there it ends up being, or it can be, a really beautiful adventure in discovering yourself. And I keep thinking back to when we were little and like the questions that we were asked and like what's your favorite color and what do you want to be when you grow up and what do you like to do in your spare time. And we knew because it's like we thought about this. People were asking the questions, so we were asking the questions of ourselves. And over time, the answers started to change. We didn't feel bad about the answers changing. So I want to be a rock star, a science teacher, I want to be an actress, and and a lawyer at the same time. Like we were just so, it was just so vast, and we were so interested in that for ourselves, and other people were too. But then you get older and then there's other priorities. Like you're not thinking about yourself anymore and what you like to do and your spare time and what brings you joy. You're thinking about your children, you're thinking about your partner, you're thinking about your work and your other responsibilities, your organizations, your duties, the board that you're on, and you forget about yourself. You forget about what's interesting to you. You forget about, who you are and those things. And so this is the beginning of being able to do that again, to learn who you are, get back in touch with yourself after so long, because we're very disconnected. And so by doing that, it's not all like, let me just dig back into the worst periods of my life. It's not that. It's, I mean, when people say the inner work, they think that it means shadow work, like you're going down in the basement to excavate some things. And there is some of that. But there is more like what brings you joy? What does pleasure feel like to you? And I there are a lot of people who can't answer that question. You used to love coloring. Do you do that now? Do you even like coloring now? Maybe you've got other interests. So this is the beginning of that. And it gets to be it gets to be pleasurable. It gets to be interesting. You get to use that curiosity to fuel um like what you can do for your own life. Like you get to the point where you realize like it's me doing certain things, it's me making certain choices, it's me thinking some certain things, and those things are driving me to do a certain or act a certain way or to engage in a certain behavior. But when you're discovering and exploring yourself and you learn what those are, you're like, let me just do a little experiment, let me pop this in here and see what happens. Oh, that was pretty cool, let me do it again and see if I can replicate it. Oh, let me do it again. And now a new habit is forming. It can be that simple. It can be that simple. But it starts with your awareness now, like where you are as a start.
So, how can we go on this exploration with you, Biba?
I'm glad you asked. I have a program. It's called The Limitless Leader. It's a mini mind. It is 3 months long, and every month we're going to explore a particular aspect of imposter syndrome. And so there are a series of mini experiments that we'll be doing every day, and there's accountability. So we'll be checking in with each other. There will be there's space for us to celebrate some of the wins. There's space for us to reflect on some of the things that we've noticed as a result of doing these mini experiments. And then there's also the private access to me. So if there's some questions that come up or some plateaus you're noticing or some challenges that are starting to arise because when you start to explore and you're doing these experiments and you're making little minute changes in yourself, you'll start to see that in your external world and others that are used to you doing these things or being this way or acting this way or doing these particular actions. When you're no longer doing that and there's some changes that are being made, they're going to take notice and they're going to have responses, some positive, some that feel pretty shitty. And so with access, you'll be able to work through that. You'll have a space to talk about what you're feeling and what you're noticing. And so it's just making sure that you're not allowing that external those external occurrences to stop your progress, because what's good for you is good for everyone. One of my friends told me that and I was like, life changed, especially given that the thing that I was doing for myself, it felt so it felt so bad. It felt so bad because I don't think that there was anybody in my life that really agreed with that choice. And they were very vocal about how they didn't agree with that choice. And it made me feel like what I was doing was wrong. But in my heart of hearts, like I knew this is what I needed to do to protect myself. Knew this is the boundary that I needed to set so that something like this can't happen again. And if it's going to change, it's going to change because I'm changing it, not because someone else has convinced me that I need to go along and continue to be in this toxic and soup of an environment because that's where they are. So it took for my friends saying that what's good for me really is good for everyone. And because I got that, I started to look for how this is good for everyone. And in looking for it, I found it. And that also helped me to understand people's perspective and not feel so attacked when they're coming to me about the thing. It's like, you're not attacking me. What you're trying to do is make a case for why you're still there. And me not being there means that you also have a choice not to be there. So
Mm.
I say all that to say it's a whole other situation, but what's good for you is good for everyone. It may not feel like that, but by recognizing that, you'll see clear signs and start to ask different questions and again change perspective where you can respond differently.
Yeah, because we believe a rising tide lifts all boats. So
Mm.
if you're a part of that rising tide and doing the work, then you're benefiting everyone. When does
Mhm.
Limitless Leader start?
Limitless Leader starts in February, at the end of February. I believe it's the 24th. I'll have to look at the date, but definitely in February. I want everybody to have their time in January where you're setting your New Year's resolutions and you're in the gym killing yourself and all the things that we do, the goals that we set, the vision boards that we're doing. Just because and I'm not crapping on anybody's activities. It may not be the thing that I do, but there is this energy about it because again, it feels like a clean slate. And so because you feel that way, that is a good time to set goals for you. That is a good time to start thinking about like what you want your life to be and do your vision boards and talk to your friends and go after it, but keep in mind that sometimes, because again, we're talking about changing behavior and pattern interrupting, that you're gung ho for a minute and then we start petering off with the effort, but it's what you tell yourself that keeps you from continuing or keeps you from getting back on the wagon. It's what you tell yourself. And so I want people to have that time so you're not doing a lot of stuff, this and also the other things that you're doing. So we're looking at February.
Yeah, because healing's not linear
It isn't.
and it takes work and time and ease. So we can go to bibaatta.com and subscribe, yes, to learn
Yeah,
more about Limitless Leader.
we can.
I'm so proud of you.
I know. Thank you so much.
All right, y'all. So that's what I would like for you to do. If this conversation has touched anything that means something to you, go to Biba Atta, that's BIBAATTA.com, sign up for her newsletter, and start thinking about what it would be like to scratch your own record,
Mm,
to give yourself a different groove to go down.
yeah.
I'd like to see it, frankly. All right, y'all. Thank you for being here. This has been the Neurodiversity Media Network. If you would like to watch every episode in this series, you can find it at neurodiversitymedianetwork.com. I believe the first season is now behind the paywall for paid subscribers only. That is $25 a month, $300 a year. We want this information and education to be as accessible as possible. And we hope to see you there. Have an amazing day.